The air inside the arena was thick with heat and dust. Hundreds of alien eyes glowed in the shadows of the stands, watching, waiting, hungry for blood at the center. A young alien girl stood trembling, her wrists bound with heavy chains that bit into her skin. Her long hair was matted with dirt, her thin frame barely able to hold itself upright around her. The sand was stained dark red from those who had faced the arena before her. The crowd's voice rose in a low, eager chant, a sound that shook the ground beneath her bare feet. The gates on the far side groaned open, and a hulking beast stepped out. Its body was covered in black scales, its mouth lined with teeth like knives, its tail dragging a spiked chain across the sand. The girl's breath came in quick gasps, her wide eyes darting for any escape, but there was none. From the stands, a voice shouted in the alien tongue, declaring her guilt for crimes she did not commit. The beast growled low, crouching, ready to strike. That was when the human stepped forward. No one had seen him before. Just a tall figure in a dusty jacket and worn boots, walking toward the arena gates as if he belonged there. The guards at the edge laughed and shoved their spears in front of him, but he didn't stop in one swift movement. He knocked the spears aside and leaped down into the arena. The crowd gasped, the chant breaking into confused murmurs. The girl stared at him, her lips parting as if to speak, but the human didn't look at her. His eyes were locked on the beast. There was no fear there, no hesitation, only a strange calm that made the creature tilt its head and pause for a heartbeat. The human raised his hands slowly, flexing his fingers as if testing the air. Then the beast roared and charged, the ground trembling under its weight. The human moved faster than the crowd expected, rolling under the first swipe of the creature's claw. He came up with a piece of broken chain from the sand. Swinging it hard into the beast's snout, the creature howled. Black blood sprang across the arena floor. It swung its tail toward him, but he ducked and darted to the side, his boots kicking up clouds of dust. The crowd was on its feet now, screaming, some cheering, some shouting for his death. The girl fell to her knees, her chains clattering. She wanted to warn him, to tell him the beast never tired, but her voice caught in her throat. The human ran straight toward the creature this time, sliding under its belly and driving the jagged chain into the softer scales there. The beast shrieked, twisting wildly, but the human held on, yanking the chain deeper. Finally, with one last violent shake, the beast collapsed, its body shuddering once before going still. The arena went silent. The human stood over the fallen monster, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. He turned then, his gaze finally meeting the girl's. There was no smile, no words, just a steady look that made her heart race. She felt something in that stare, something dangerous, something that didn't belong to prey. It was the look of another predator. The crowd erupted again, some in outrage, others in awe. The guards rushed down into the arena, unsure whether to attack or bow. The human stepped toward the girl and knelt beside her. He pulled a knife from his belt and cut through the chains with quick, sharp motions. When the metal fell away, her arms sagged with relief. She stared at him, her throat dry. He leaned closer, his voice low and steady. "Can you walk?" She nodded slowly. Still stunned, he took her by the arm and pulled her to her feet. For the first time in days, she felt the weight of the chains gone. But the weight of his grip was just as firm. They walked toward the gates together, the crowd parting like water around them. But as they stepped into the shadow of the exit, she whispered something in her language, her voice shaking. The human didn't understand, but he caught one word repeated twice. Later, he would learn what it meant. For now, he only felt the heat of her hand clutching his arm like it was the only thing keeping her alive, and above them, in the high seats of the arena, men in rich robes watched with narrowed eyes, The law had been triggered. The ancient right of the savior over the saved. If the human knew what he had just earned, he might have hesitated, but he didn't know. Not yet. Asterisk, the sound of the arena still echoed in his ears as they walked through the narrow stone corridors. The girl's steps were unsteady, but she never let go of his arm, her grip almost desperate. They passed guards who looked away quickly, as if afraid to meet his eyes. The air was cooler here, but it carried the smell of damp stone and old blood. They reached a heavy wooden door, and when it opened, tall alien elder stepped inside. His skin marked with gold tattoos that shimmered under the torchlight. The elder's eyes studied the human from head to toe, not with curiosity, but with the weight of judgment. In a voice deep and slow, he spoke to the girl first. His words in a language the human couldn't understand. She answered quietly, her voice trembling. And each time she spoke, the elder's frown deepened. Finally, the elder turned to him, switching to the trade language so there was no mistake. "You have invoked an ancient right," the elder said, his tone heavy. "By saving her in the arena, you are owed the first night." The human blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. "I'm owed." "What?" he asked. The elder's gaze didn't soften. "It is the law of her people. The one who saves a maiden from death may claim her." Fully, before any other man, the human felt the girl's hand tighten on his arm. And when he looked at her, her eyes were wide, not with fear, but with something else he couldn't read. He shook his head slightly. "I didn't save her for that." The elder's voice grew cold. "The reason does not matter. The right exists, and now many will want it. If you do not take it, they will." The words sank into him like ice. Outside the door, voices rose, a murmur of the crowd still lingering from the arena. But these were sharper, whispering his name, asking questions. The elder stepped closer, his gold-marked skin catching the flicker of torchlight. "You have until sunrise to claim her. If you do not, the right becomes open to challenge. And there are men here who will kill you for the chance." The human didn't answer, but his jaw tightened. When they left the chamber, the crowd was waiting. Merchants shoved baskets of fruit toward him. Strangers called him hero in accents thick with their own dialects. He ignored them, leading the girl through the streets. But everywhere he looked, there were eyes watching. Some smiled too widely, others looked at her with hunger. The girl stayed silent, her steps quickening when shadows passed too close. By the time they reached the small inn where he had been staying, the sun was already low in the sky. Inside, the innkeeper froze when he saw them, then gave the girl a strange bow before hurrying away without a word. The human pushed the door to his room open, letting her step inside first. It was simple: a single bed, a small table, a window overlooking the market street. She stood in the middle of the room, looking lost, her hands twisting together. "You should rest," he said, but she didn't move toward the bed. Instead, she turned to face him, her voice quiet but clear. "You do not understand. They will come for you." He raised an eyebrow. "For me?" She stepped closer. "Not for you, for me, but you are in their way now. If you do not take me before sunrise, the law will let them fight you for the right, and they will not let you live." Her words were not desperate, they were matter-of-fact. The way someone might speak of the weather. A knock came at the door, sharp and fast. The human crossed the room and opened it just enough to see the figure outside. A tall alien man stood there, broad-shouldered, his robes lined with silver thread. He smiled without warmth. "The girl belongs to my house by tomorrow. It would be wise for you to give her to me now." "Human, I will pay well." The human didn't blink, not interested, and shut the door in his face. The girl's eyes followed him as he walked back into the room. "That was one of them," she said softly. "He is not the worst." He leaned against the wall, watching her for a moment, trying to read her expression. "You want me to claim you?" he said finally. Her gaze didn't waver. "I want to live." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the muffled noise of the market below. Night fell quickly, bringing with it the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Once, twice, then 3 times, someone tried the door handle. The human sat near the table, a small blade in his hand, the girl sitting quietly on the bed, her knees drawn up. Neither of them spoke, but both knew the truth: this night was not going to be quiet. Somewhere out there, men were waiting for him to make a choice, and if he didn't, they would make it for him. The first attack came just before midnight. The human had been sitting at the table, sharpening the edge of his knife, while the girl sat on the bed, her eyes fixed on the door. The sound was faint at first, a gentle scrape, like metal brushing wood, but it grew into a steady, deliberate rhythm. He stood quietly, the knife in his hand, his other hand motioning for her to stay still. The door shuddered once, twice, then burst inward with a violent crack. 2 figures rushed in, their faces hidden by black cloth, each holding curved blades that glinted in the dim light. The human moved fast, stepping aside as the first attacker lunged, letting the man's momentum carry him into the wall. The second swung low, aiming for the human's legs, but the human kicked him hard in the chest, sending him crashing into the bed frame. The girl scrambled back against the wall, her breathing sharp and fast. The first attacker recovered quickly, but before he could strike again, the human drove his knife into the man's arm, twisting hard, until the blade clattered to the floor. The fight ended as suddenly as it began, the 2 masked men staggering toward the door and disappearing into the night, leaving only the sound of the girl's quick breaths. The human shut the door and pushed the heavy table against it. "Locking it in place, they won't stop," she said quietly, her voice almost lost in the darkness. He turned toward her. "I'm starting to believe that." She looked down at her hands, her fingers tightening together. "By sunrise, it will be worse. They will send the ones who don't leave without blood." The hours passed slowly, the room filled with the faint noises of the city, distant voices, the creak of wood, the occasional call of a night vendor. But under it all, there was always the sound of movement outside their door. Shadows slid past the thin gap at the bottom, pausing now and then as if listening. The human didn't sleep, and neither did she. Once, when the noise faded for a long stretch, he thought they might have given up. But then the window rattled. He crossed the room in 3 strides and yanked it open. Catching sight of a hand reaching in without hesitation, he slammed it down, trapping the intruder's wrist against the sill until there was a sharp cry of pain and the hand vanished. The girl's voice trembled. "You cannot fight them all." He glanced over his shoulder. "I can try." She shook her head. "They will keep coming until you make the claim. You don't understand what the first night means here. It is not just a custom, it is a shield, one that even the worst of them will not break." Her words stayed with him as the night dragged on. She wasn't wrong. Every attack was more desperate than the last. The third wave came with fire, a small clay jar thrown against the door, flames licking upward as smoke filled the room. He grabbed the blanket from the bed, smothering the fire before it could spread, but the smell clung to the air, sharp and bitter. Through the smoke, he saw her watching him, her eyes steady despite the danger. "You think I'm asking because I want you?" she said suddenly, her voice quiet but cutting through the noise. "I'm asking because if you don't, I will be taken, and when that happens, I will not live to see another sunrise." He studied her for a long moment, then looked away, gripping the knife tighter. Something about her voice was different, now less fear, more certainty. It was as if she had accepted that the only way to survive was through him. The night outside grew colder, frost creeping along the edges of the window glass. The streets below had emptied, leaving only the occasional shadow moving quickly between buildings. The human knew what that meant, those still awake or not. Merchants or travelers, they were hunters, and in this city, tonight, he and the girl were the prey. The difference was, he had no intention of running, somewhere deep inside. The choice had already begun to take shape, not because of the law, not because of the right, but because every set of eyes that looked at her saw property, and his saw something else. She met his gaze once more. The silence between them holding. Everything they couldn't yet say. Beyond the door, footsteps approached again. Slower this time, deliberate. It was not over, not yet. And dawn still felt far away. By morning, the city felt different. The narrow streets were alive with the hum of voices. But the sound was sharper, charged, as if the whole place was holding its breath. The human and the girl walked quietly, keeping to the shaded alleys, but everywhere they went, eyes followed them. Some smiled too easily, others whispered to each other, their words disappearing into the warm air. The girl's steps were quicker than before, her head lowered, her hand brushing against his arm as if to make sure he was still there. Near the central square, the smell of roasted spices drifted from an open courtyard. Colorful banners hung between tall poles, swaying in the breeze. Tables were being set, piled high with golden fruits, steaming breads, and silver cups filled with dark, sweet wine. A voice called out from the crowd, inviting them inside. Before he could answer, the girl leaned closer and whispered, "It's a feast for you." He frowned. But the guards in ceremonial armor were already moving to greet them. Their faces were polite masks, but their eyes were measuring. "This is the city's gift." One of them said, "A show of honor to the savior of the arena." The girl's hand tightened slightly on his sleeve. He said nothing, but allowed himself to be led toward the long table at the center of the courtyard. The air inside was warm and heavy with the scent of flowers. Music drifted from a group of musicians in the corner, soft and slow. The guests were already seated, dressed in silks and precious metals, their eyes flicking between him and the girl. He sat at the place of honor, the girl beside him, a silver plate placed before them both. The first sip of wine was sweet, almost too sweet, and it left a strange heat on his tongue. The girl didn't drink. Her eyes kept scanning the room, her shoulders tense beneath the thin cloth of her dress. When the second cup was poured, she leaned close to him, her breath brushing his ear. "They will try to take me while you are distracted," she whispered. He glanced at her, but her gaze never left the crowd. The music swelled, and more food was brought, each dish more elaborate than the last. Each cup refilled before it was half empty. Laughter rolled through the air, but it was too smooth, too rehearsed. The human's eyes kept drifting to the edges of the courtyard, where shadows moved just out of sight. The girl reached for her plate, then froze, her fingers brushing something under the bread, thin, metallic. A folded scrap, she slid it toward him, hidden beneath her hand. He unfolded it under the table, reading the words scrawled in sharp, quick lines. "Leave now, or she is gone before the third song ends." The music kept playing, steady and calm. But his heart was already pounding. He looked at her, and in her eyes he saw the same thought, the same decision already made. Without a word, he stood, pulling her with him. The guests reacted slowly, too surprised at first, but the guards at the far end began to move. He pushed through the crowd, ignoring the shouts, turning sharply down a side corridor lined with red curtains. The girl clung to his arm, her breath quick and shallow, behind them. The sound of boots on stone grew louder. They broke into a run, weaving through narrow passages until they burst into the open streets. Rain had begun to fall, not gentle, but heavy and acidic, burning faint holes in the banners that hung above. He pulled her hood over her head, shielding her as they sprinted down an alley slick with greenish water. The shouts followed, but they were further now. Echoing off the walls, they ducked into the shadow of an old temple, the doors half broken, the air inside damp and cold. The girl leaned against the wall, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "They almost had me," she said softly, her voice trembling. He looked around the dark interior. The flicker of old candle stubs casting weak light on the stone floor. "They'll keep trying," he replied, "and each time we'll be closer." Then the last, she stepped toward him, her eyes steady now, despite her shaking hands. "Do you understand why I asked you that night in the arena? If you don't claim me before sunrise tomorrow, I won't be standing here." Her words hung between them. Outside, the rain beat against the roof, dripping through cracks somewhere in the city. The ones they'd escaped from would be gathering. Again, the human knew they had only bought themselves hours, not safety, and the choice still waited for him, closer now than ever. The rain had not stopped by nightfall. It came down in sheets, hissing as it struck the stone streets, turning every corner into a curtain of steam. The human and the girl moved through the shadows, slipping from alley to alley. Their footsteps lost beneath the noise of the storm. Every now and then, she would glance over her shoulder, her eyes searching the darkness. It wasn't fear of the rain. It was fear of who might be walking in it. They reached the edge of the market square, now empty except for the flickering light of a few dying lanterns. The smell of wet ash hung in the air, and the stalls stood abandoned, their colorful cloth covers sagging under the weight of the water. He stopped, listening, through the steady roar of the rain. There was another sound boots, many of them, moving in rhythm. She heard it too. Her hand tightening on his arm. From the far side of the square, shapes emerged, tall figures in dark armor, their faces hidden behind curved masks, and in the middle of them, walking with the slow, certain steps of someone who had nothing to fear, came a man unlike the others. His armor was marked with jagged red lines, the metal blackened by battle, and his eyes glowed faintly in the shadows. The girl froze, whispering the name like a curse. The warlord stopped a few paces away, the rain dripping from the edges of his cloak. His voice was low but carried easily through the storm. "Human, you hold what is mine." The human didn't move, his grip on the girl's hand tightening. "She's not yours," he said, his voice steady. The warlord tilted his head, almost amused. "The first night, yes, I know it, but you have not claimed her, and by dawn, her fate will be mine." The girl's breath came fast, but she stepped forward, her voice shaking. "I will never be yours." The warlord's gaze slid over her like she was nothing but a thing to be taken. Then back to the human. "You have until sunrise," he said, "but you will not live to see it." He raised his hand, and the armored soldiers moved, spreading in a slow circle around them. The rain turned the stones slick underfoot, the smell of metal and wet earth heavy in the air. The first soldier lunged, blade flashing. The human shoved the girl back and met the strike with his own knife, the clash ringing sharp in the rain. He spun, using the slick ground to slide past a second attacker, driving his shoulder into the man's chest and sending him crashing into a stall. The girl stayed close, but she had picked up a broken length of wood, her knuckles white around it. Every time someone came near, she swung hard, forcing them back toward the human. The fight was fast and brutal, the sound of steel against steel mixing with the hiss of the storm each time he cut one down. Another step forward, their masks dripping rainwater, their boots splashing through the shallow puddles. The warlord didn't join in. He simply watched, his eyes locked on the girl. She met his stare once and felt the cold certainty there he believed he would win. The human saw it too, and it pushed him harder when the last soldier fell back, breathing hard. The warlord stepped forward. "You can kill them all," he said calmly, "but you can't kill me before the sun rises." The human said nothing, but his hand found the girl's again, pulling her toward the nearest alley. The warlord didn't follow, only watched as they disappeared into the rain, his voice carried. After them, run if you like, but she will be mine by dawn. They didn't stop running until the city walls loomed ahead. A gate stood half open, the guards asleep under a tattered awning. They slipped past without a sound, into the fields beyond, where the rain softened into mist and the darkness seemed deeper. The girl's steps slowed, her breaths ragged. He turned to her, his voice low. "We have hours left, nothing more." She met his gaze, her face pale under the moonlight. "Then decide," she said, "before they catch us again." The wind carried the distant echo of hooves on wet stone, and they both knew the hunt hadn't ended. The choice waited for him like the edge of a blade, sharp and unavoidable, and dawn was coming fast. The mist outside the city wrapped around them like a cold breath. Each step through the wet grass was slow. Careful, the earth soft beneath their boots. The rain had stopped, but the air still held the heavy smell of it. Mixed with the faint metallic taste of the city far behind them, they kept to the shadows of the low hills. The girl glancing back every few moments, her eyes searching the darkness. For movement, the human could hear her breathing. Too quick, not just from the run, but from the weight of something she had not yet said. They found shelter in the ruins of an old watchtower, its walls broken, its roof half gone. Inside, the wind whistled through the cracks, carrying the distant howl of some night creature. He set his pack down and scanned the horizon. But nothing moved except the long grass under the wind. She stayed near the doorway. Her arms wrapped around herself, her head lowered. Finally, she spoke, her voice low. "You think the first night is just about the body." He turned toward her, frowning. "That's what they keep saying," he replied. She shook her head. Stepping closer, "It's not. It's about power. It's a mark that cannot be erased. Once claimed, I become part of your name, part of your protection. No one, not even the warlord, can touch me without facing you." He leaned back against the broken wall, the weight of her words settling in. "That's why they want it so badly," she continued. "Because it's not only taking me, it's taking everything that comes with me. My bloodline, my connection to the high clans. Even if my family is gone," her eyes met his. And he saw the truth. There she wasn't only fighting for her own life. She was fighting to keep her lineage out of the warlord's hands. "If he gets me," she said, her voice trembling now, "he gets the right to call himself part of the old blood, and that will make him untouchable." The human rubbed the back of his neck, looking away for a moment. "Why me then? Why not someone from your own people?" She gave a short, bitter laugh. "Because my own people would sell me just as fast. They'd see gold and forget my name." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the wind through the cracks. Somewhere far away, the faint thud of hooves echoed again, closer now than before. He crossed the room to the window gap, scanning the dark fields, his eyes narrowing. "They're still coming," he said. She didn't move, but her voice was steady. "Then you have to decide before they arrive." The choice twisted inside him like a blade. He hadn't saved her to own her, and yet every step since the arena had been shaped by the law she carried on her shoulders. Outside, the sound of hooves grew louder. Joined by the faint jingle of armor, she stepped to his side, close enough that he could feel her warmth even in the cold night air. "If you wait until dawn, it's over," she said softly. "No matter how many of them you kill." He looked at her, and for a moment, the fight in her eyes reminded him of the moment in the arena when she had faced the beast frightened. Yes, but refusing to look away, her lips parted like she might say more. But the sound of shouting cut through the night, sharp and clear. They were near. He grabbed his pack, pulling it over his shoulder, then took her hand. "Move," he said. And they slipped out the far side of the ruins, disappearing into the tall grass. The moon broke through the clouds. throwing silver light across the fields. They ran without speaking, the ground wet under their boots, the mist curling at their knees. Behind them, torches bobbed in the darkness. Moving like hungry eyes, the girl stumbled once, and he caught her before she fell, his grip firm. "We can't keep running," she said between breaths. "They'll run us down." He slowed, his eyes darting to a low ridge ahead, a shape, half hidden in the shadows, a shrine small and ancient, its stone walls still standing. Its doorway narrow, they slipped inside, the air cooler here. The sound of the wind muffled by thick stone. The girl leaned against the wall, her hair damp, her chest rising and falling quickly. He stood in the doorway, watching the torches draw. Nearer, their light flickering against the mist. "You have minutes," she whispered. "And if you don't use them, everything ends." Her words felt heavier than the storm they had outrun. He didn't answer, but his hand tightened around the knife at his belt. Somewhere in the dark, beyond the shrine, the warlord was coming. And dawn was no longer a distant threat. Heat was the next breath. The first light of dawn touched the mist like a blade cutting through smoke. The air outside the shrine was colder now, each breath hanging white in the dim glow. The human stood at the doorway, his hand resting on the knife at his side, his eyes fixed on the shapes moving closer through the haze. The girl was behind him, her back against the wall, her gaze steady even though her fingers trembled slightly. The sound of hooves grew louder, the rhythm joined by the slow, heavy march of armored boots. They came into view, the warlord at their center, his black and red armor gleaming under the rising sun. The soldiers spread out in a half circle. There, torches still burning despite the morning light. The warlord stopped a few paces away, his voice calm, almost amused. "You have run far, human. But the sun is here. Your time is over." The human didn't move, his voice just as steady. "You want her, you'll have to take her from me." The warlord's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I will, and when I do, the law will be mine." The girl stepped forward, her voice cutting through the mist. "The law is not yours yet." The warlord's gaze shifted to her, his expression unreadable. "True," he said slowly, "but the moment the light touches her without your claim, she is mine by right." The human's jaw tightened, his grip on the knife firm. The light was growing stronger, washing over the wet grass, creeping toward the shrine. He looked at the girl, and for a brief moment, the noise of the soldiers, the clink of armor, the hiss of torches all faded. Her eyes were locked on his. Not pleading, not demanding, but waiting. There was no more time to think. He stepped forward, placing himself between her and the warlord, his voice loud enough for every soldier to hear. "I claim her." The words cut through the air like a blade. The soldiers froze, some glancing at each other, the warlord's smile fading into something colder. The girl's breath caught, but she didn't look away from him. The human reached for her hand, pulling her to stand beside him, his grip firm, unshakable. The light of the sun broke fully over them, and in that moment, the law sealed itself. The warlord's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing. "You think the law will protect you from me?" he said, his voice low with threat. "It's not just the law," a human replied. "It's me." For the first time, the warlord's control cracked, a flicker of rage passing through his eyes. He took one step forward. But the soldiers hesitated, bound by the very tradition he had counted on to win. The girl stood straighter now, her voice stronger than it had been all night. "You have no right to me and no claim to my blood," she said. "Leave before you lose more than your pride." The warlord's hands curled into fists. But he knew the truth. If he broke the law now, he would lose the support of the high clans who watched such matters closely. Slowly, he turned his horse, the soldiers following, their armor clinking in the damp air. As they vanished into the mist, his voice carried back. This is not the end. The human watched until they were gone, the tension in his shoulders slowly easing. Beside him, the girl let out a long breath, the first she had taken without fear since the arena. "You didn't have to," she said softly, her eyes searching his face. "Maybe not," he replied, "but I wanted to." Her lips curved in two, the faintest smile, though her eyes still held the weight of everything that had passed. They turned back toward the city, walking through the wet grass as the sun climbed higher. The law had been spoken, the claim made, and though danger still lurked beyond the hills, for now she was safe. Every step they took felt different, lighter. For her, heavier for him, the choice was made, and with it came a new kind of bond, one that neither of them fully understood yet, but both knew could not be broken.